I was at work one Friday evening working for a ministry in Florida, and a phone call came through. I was working as a junior accountant, and I remember very well when the phone call came through and it was sent to my desk. The message over the intercom was, somebody on the phone thinks that you are related to them. They want to talk to you. Put this in the context of all my life after I met my father, I was trying to find who my mother was. When I met my dad, I said, "Dad, whatever happened to Mom?" He said, "I don't want to talk about it." And I found out that they were never married. They got together long enough just to conceive me, and they went their separate ways. She was visiting from the Virgin Islands. He was a city slicker in New York City. They got together. She loved musicians, but they never got married. And I was the result of that night of whatever you want to call it. And you know, back then, I've been doing everything I possibly could to change the terminology that is linked to a child born out of wedlock, because, you know, you often hear the term that the child is illegitimate. Have you heard that before? No, the parents are illegitimate. The child didn't do anything wrong to get here. Come on, help me out. Right? I was a result of that union. But here I was in Orlando, Florida. The reason I was in Orlando is because the Lord sent my wife into my life, and when we decided to leave New York, her family lived in Orlando. But God had a bigger reason for my wife and I getting together. It was not just to move to Florida, but you'll find out in a moment, why Florida? Well, I called the lady back and I said, you called, you wanted to talk to me. Could someone get me a tissue? I need a tissue. There's one right next to Audrey right there. If you could give me one, I appreciate it. Thank you, just one of those. Yeah, I know, Alan, those things are like safe deposit boxes. Thank you so much. As I was speaking to the lady on the phone, I said to her, "You called, you wanted to talk to me?" She said, "Yes." She said, when I heard your name on the radio, and the way she heard my name was, there was a Christian talent search being held in Orlando, and it was all the whole state plus the southern Georgia, and I came in among the top 10 finalists, and every hour on the hour, it was kind of like a radio American Idol. Every hour on the hour, they would mention the final 10 contestants. My name was mentioned, John Lomacang, John Lomacang. And she heard the name, and she said, "I needed to talk to you because there's no way that you could have that name and we not be related." I said, "Okay, well, please explain." She said, "Well, I was born in the Virgin Islands, and I'm of Filipino descent." And I thought, bing, Virgin Islands. And I remembered then, before my wife and I left New York City to move down to Florida, I was working at a bank. And just a few years before we moved to Florida, that was the first time I saw an original copy of my birth certificate, which gave me the information of what my mom's name was, where she was born, and the number of children born prior to my birth. So when she said Virgin Islands, a light came on, because I remember getting that birth certificate when we worked in New York City, and my wife and I went. It was on 72nd Street in Central Park West, a very ritzy area. We went to the home of the address where my mother was living when I was born, rang the doorbell, and as a result of that, no one knew exactly who she was. You know, a lot of time had passed. So when I heard that, just this chord was struck in my heart, that, wow, what's behind this? Then she said to me, "Well, tell me something about yourself." I said, "Well, my name is John. I have a sister named Vivian. I have a niece named Taisha. I was born in New York City." She said, "Wow, that's strange." "What part is strange?" She said, "The John and the Vivian thing." I said, "Why is that strange?" She said, "I had a sister who said that she had a son named John and a daughter named Vivian. But every time we asked where her children were, she could never produce any evidence." And to show how God works in mysterious ways, getting me my birth certificate 2 years earlier to know the answer to this question, she says, by any chance, is your mother's name Rosario? I said, yes, it is. It's Rosario Maria Lomacang. She said, that's my sister. I cannot explain to you. I'm usually calm and collected. I was in shock. I couldn't even breathe. I started hyperventilating. My coworker across from the desk from me was saying, what's going on? What's wrong? I couldn't hardly breathe. I dropped the phone. I began to cry profusely. And when I picked up the phone, all I could ask was, is she alive? Is she alive? Tell me, is she alive? And she said, yes, your mother is alive and she's living in the Virgin Islands. And then she said, I've got to meet you. If I see you, I will really know whether or not you're Rosie's son. And I didn't understand what she meant then, but I know now because in our family, everybody has big ears. So we don't have, everybody, some people have fingerprints, we have ear prints. But then I was such in shock. I was working for a Christian ministry, and she said, okay, here's my address, come to meet me at my job. And so I called my wife with the intention of telling her every detail of the story, but I couldn't get it out. I couldn't even speak. I said, Angie. She said, what? I said, something happened. She said, what happened? I said, something marvelous happened. She said, what was it? I said, something wonderful happened. She said, what was it? It was marvelous. Well, what was it? It was wonderful. She said, what was it? She said, did you win the lottery? I don't even play the lottery. I said, okay, I'll tell you what. You wait at your job, I'll meet you at your job. And I started walking around the office in this Christian ministry. I kept saying these words. I mean, literally, I'm crying and I'm in shock. I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm walking around and said, she's alive. She's alive. They knew he was alive, but who is she? And I got to the front desk in the receptionist area, and the reception said, who's alive? I said, my mother's alive. Can you drive me to my wife's job? She said, get off my desk. I'll take you to the job. That day, I rode a motorcycle to work. I could hardly stand up, let alone get on a motorcycle. Went to my wife's job, picked her up. We went home and changed as though we needed to. We were looking good already at work. And then we drove up to this company, and Hartford Insurance Company, this 8-story building. And I walked into the lobby, and I remember the lady's name, but I didn't ask her for her last name. Can we help you, sir? Yes. Do you have a lady working here by the name of Teresa? Do you have a last name? No. Hold on. It wasn't 15 minutes. They said, 3rd floor. Got on the elevator. Went up to the 3rd floor. Do I look okay? You look okay. You're fine. I'll take that as an advantage. The elevator doors opened up, and I see this lady walking down the corridor of the office, almost like the center aisle. You know how your mind just phases everything else out, and she's the only focus. She's walking towards me, walking towards me, walking towards me, and she gets close enough to reach out her arms and her hands, and she grabs my hand. She says, yes, you're Rosie's son. I could see it in your face. And this is the lady. This is my mom's sister, Teresa. Teresa, she hugged me. She began to cry. I began to cry. Her supervisor said, go to the break room. Just take some time. Just go to the break room. And we walked there, and she wouldn't let go of my hand. She sat down at the table, held my hand as she sat down, and she looked at me with gripping my hand. She says, oh, this is amazing. She says, oh, I have so much to tell you. She says, I am the oldest of 6 girls. Your mother is the next one in line, and there are 4 more. She said, tonight, she said, John, you come from a huge family. I want you to see this. I went to work that day not knowing a single family member. And at the end of the day, God is beginning to unfold to me that I have 6 aunts, and I'm from a huge family. She says, come over tonight. We're going to call your mother. And by the way, when you come over tonight, you'll meet all your cousins. She says, I have 10 children of my own. My family just started opening up like an artichoke. I mean, what else are you going to tell me? So that night when we went over to the house, here are my cousins. In the morning, I knew none of these people. In the evening, I knew them all. There I am in the back, once again, hiding like Lionel Richie. There's my wife over there. I was just in awe about how this thing is unfolding. Once again, when this happened, I called my sister. I said, Val, you got to come to Florida. And she was on vacation. She cut her vacation short and was on her way to Florida. My aunt sat me down. She says, I want to tell you, you come from a large family. She said, tonight, what we're going to do, we're going to call your mom. And what I want you to do is I want you to listen on the phone. Don't say anything, just listen. Here's the plan, she says. While you're listening, we're going to try to convince your mom to come to Florida for the final talent search. Sit in the audience, and when your name is mentioned, you come out on stage and sing. That's how your mom is going to meet you. And I thought, that's crazy. She might have a heart attack. We have not seen, I don't even know what she looks like. And I started seeing some pictures of what my mom looked like. So she said, okay, we're going to call her. Hello? Now you know what I wanted to do. I wanted to yell, Mom! But she said, she was trying her best to convince her to come to Florida, but she wouldn't budge. She said, I'm taking care of Jimmy's children. That's my older brother. I'd never met him either. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he looked like. So when the phone hung up, by the way, here's the pictures of my aunts, from the youngest aunt to the oldest aunt. Now, so the one in the white is my mother's closest sister, Aunt Gloria. She still lives in the Virgin Islands. So my Aunt Teresa on the far left, your left, she said, oh, it's not going to work. She's not budging. We're going to have to do something else. She said, we'll tell Gloria to tell her what happened. That's the one in the white, because they were really close. So I heard the story as it was fed back to me. By now, this story exploded all over Central Florida. My story became the 6 o'clock news leading story. Central Florida man finds his mother after 25 years. News at 6, news at 11. The news crew came to my door, ding, rang the doorbell, big camera. Are you John Lomacang? It was just like Singapore, hot. It was about 90-something degrees that night. I was sweating. I looked like a Cuban running from immigration. And sorry if you're Cuban. And I thought, this is ridiculous. That's the reason I wear hairspray now, so that not going to catch me like that again. But I was the top story at the 6 o'clock news and the 10 o'clock news. Finally, my sister came to Florida. And so my aunt relayed the story back to us. She said, Rosie, now speaking to my mom in the Virgin Islands, Rosie, what would you do if we told you we found someone special? She said, well, I'll be happy. I mean, of course. She said, what would you do if we told you we found your son and your daughter? Her response was, did you? And I was wondering now, this answered my story. I was wondering why my aunt would not let me speak to my mom on the phone. When the phone hung up, before the conversation ensued with my other aunt in the Virgin Islands and my mom, I said to my aunt, why wouldn't you let me say anything on the phone? She says, it's not that simple. So what do you mean it's not that simple? That's my mom. She says, well, 11 years ago, somebody walked up to your mom and said, what happened to your children? You always said you had children. What happened to them? And my mom, she says, got so tired of people asking about her children, she made up the story that she'd been telling for 11 years. She said, my children, they both died in a fire in New Jersey, just to quiet the questions. She said, so it's not that simple to say anything on the phone because as far as your mom is concerned, you're dead. We got to break this news to her a different way. So my aunt is saying, Rosie, what would you say if we found your son and daughter? And she said, did you? My aunt said, yes, your son is in Orlando and your daughter's in New York, and they want to meet you. Sabbath morning came, I was at church. I was going to sing the song Rise Again. I could hardly sing at all. When I came back home from church and walked into the home where I was staying, my wife's aunt's house, as soon as I walked in, she says, your mother called. Call your mother. And the phone rang once, and my mother picked up the phone. We never spoke before that moment. I said, Mom? John? I don't know what to say next. And all I heard her saying is, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I did what I thought was best for you. I couldn't afford to raise you. I had nothing. I left you at a home where I knew they could take care of you. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I said, Mom, stop saying I'm sorry. I'm glad that God brought us back together. I forgive you. She said, what did you say? I said, I forgive you. Forget about the last number of years. I forgive you. She said, did you just say you forgive me? I said, yes, I forgive you. And she said to me, she said, because you forgave me, I want to be what you are. Because I didn't think anybody would forgive me. You don't know what kind of life I lived. And so I said, Mom, when am I going to see you? She said, okay, I'm going to come to Florida. I'm going to come to meet you. Well, by then, the news reporters were waiting for this to happen on July 4th. We changed it to July 5th because we did not want there to be a news circus. My sister arrived from her vacation. My new family got together, and we went to the airport to meet my mom. It was Eastern Airlines, pulled up. That's when you can actually go to the gate and wait for the people to come off. Those days have changed. Everybody came off the plane. I was just waiting to meet my mom, and no one showed up. I turned to my aunt and said, what happened, Aunt Teresa? She said, what? She said, well, you know, that's like Rosie. She got nervous. Maybe she got off in Miami to get her head together. Maybe she'll come later. And we started walking away from the terminal, from the gate, and as we were walking away, just then, I guess the last passenger, she stayed long enough to get her head together. She was about to see her son that she had abandoned for 26 years. And she walked straight up to me, this little, short Filipino lady. Here's a picture of our first meeting. There she is on the right side of the screen, my sister on the left, and I'm in the middle. She walked right up to me and she said to me, how did you get so big? I said, I grew. I hugged her and she hugged me, and once again we just burst out into a fountain of joyful tears, sat down with my mom. And my natural inquisitive mind, being raised in New York, I was trying to figure out, is this really my mom? I said, okay, if you're really my mother, when you left me, what did you leave me with? She said, that's easy. It was a white and blue hard shell suitcase with a red inside, silk inside, and a mirror. Am I right, she said? You're right. And I vowed to keep that suitcase until the day. It's a small carry-on suitcase, what ladies would use for their makeup. She said, am I right? I said, you're right. She said, nobody would know that but a mother. I said, okay, if you're really my mother, why, if my sister's name is Vivian, do we call her Val? She said, you can't figure that out? Her first name is Vivian, her middle name is Anita, her last name is Lomacang. Just take the first letter, V-A-L. Duh. She said, there's certain things only a mother knows. And I said, okay, you proved your point. And that's us there. Shortly after I met my mom, we joined the Heritage Singers. And I'm going to tell you, this is the first picture my mom and I ever took together as mother and son to celebrate. I don't know if you know what that's like. Maybe some of you have had a similar story, but it felt so good to hug someone that I knew belonged to me, and I belonged to her. Shortly after that, I joined the Heritage Singers, and I began sharing the story around the world. So let me walk you through my humble beginnings so you can see my family. This is my grandfather. He's the Filipino from Leyte. He was a merchant Marines when he was in the Marines. When he left the Marines, he came to the Virgin Islands because he said it reminded him of the Caribbean, like Cebu and Leyte, where it was very tropical. He was traveling around the Virgin Islands, going from island to island with the crew, delivering goods and services. When he came to St. Thomas, he took in sick, and this is my grandmother. My grandmother there with my mother in her lap and my aunt standing by her side. My grandmother, her journey began in Normandy, France. She's a French lady. She went from Normandy, France to St. Bart's, St. Kitts, and then ended up in St. Thomas. Kind of along that route, they ended up in St. Thomas. So when my grandfather took in sick, she was his nurse. She was single. He was single. They fell in love. So when the boat came through the next time, he did not get on the boat. They got married in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. And today, if you go to the Virgin Islands in St. Thomas, there's a town called Frenchtown, where most of my family lives, the French people. This is my mom as she grew up there. My mom is the one on the right, and her sister is the one on the left. My grandfather died before the other 4 girls were born. He died in a tragedy that we're still trying to figure it out, but the best we can figure it out, it was something that happened that was pretty drastic, and he lost his life in it. Here's my mom and her sister. My mom is on the left, her sister's on the right. Her sister took on more of the French, my mom took on more of the Filipino. Here's my mom growing up there in the small town of St. Thomas, in that small island of the Virgin Islands. And this is her. She was a magnificent seamstress. She could sew anything. She won awards got large sums of money for just her ability to sew. A woman who could meet you, and 5 years later she could tell you what you wore when she met you. This is my mom shortly after I was born. Isn't she a pretty lady? You can say amen. That was her there. You might notice I cropped the picture a little bit here because she had a cigarette. I don't want her cigarette in my picture. And this is my mom and my dad together when they met. My mom got her hair permed and went to New York and ran into a jazz musician who was her city slicker, and you know the rest of the story as I told you earlier. Here's a picture of some of my family in the Virgin Islands. So when you come to my house and look at my photo album, it looked like somebody else's album. Our family is very international. Notice this. You see those ears? My Aunt Gatti, she just passed away. I was thinking about starting an airline. You'll get that Tuesday. That's my family there. Our family line was strong. And that's my grandaunt. Lelel was the last one. This is Aunt Gatti. And here's my uncle. He's trying to hide his ears, not working very well. And my grandnieces, they've grown up now. I have to add some newer pictures because they've grown up now, and one of them has a daughter. 2 of them now have a daughter. And this is my brother to the left and my niece to the right. They live in the Virgin Islands in St. Thomas. And this is my aunt. Before my wife and I were working at the ReABN, before I started pastoring in the Illinois Conference, this is when we were invited there to do the story and tell the story on air about how I met my mom. And this is my brother and I when my wife and I celebrated our 25th wedding anniversary. Now you know why we chose the Virgin Islands. Because when we were married originally, I did not know my family. So we took the celebration to the Virgin Islands and celebrated there together. Let me tell you the story as I close this evening. When I met my mom was an alcoholic. She smoked 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. In her own words, she said, "I have more than 7 demons in my life." Her life had spiraled down after she abandoned her children. She abandoned my brother, she abandoned my sister, and she abandoned me. When my brother was born, she took him back to the Virgin Islands, left him there, and went back to New York, where my sister was born. My sister was kidnapped when she was 2 years old, and she came back when she was 3, only to be abandoned by her mom shortly after she came back from being kidnapped. And I was only 3 months old when my mom decided to leave both of us at a babysitter. But when I came back, and as I was in the Heritage Singers, I would send my mom stuff to read. I'd send her music. I'd say, Mom, give your life to the Lord. Give your life to Jesus. You need to be delivered. So fast forward, I left Heritage in 1986, moved back to Florida, and then in 1987, I was invited to start pastoral ministry in the Northern California Conference. In 1988, my wife and I got our first church together, and I got a phone call from my mom one day, and here's the phone call. She said, John, I said, hi, Mom, how you doing? She says, I am on my way to live with you. I'm thinking 7 demons, cigarettes, alcohol. How am I as a pastor going to deal with that? She said, oh, by the way, I have some good news to tell you. I said, what's the good news? She says, remember you told me to go ahead and have someone pray for me? I said, I remember that. She says, 6 months ago, I had a pastor pray for me. And from the moment he prayed for me to the very present, I was instantly delivered from alcohol and cigarettes. Can somebody say, praise the Lord? Amen. You can give God a hand. Praise God. She says, and by the way, I am no longer a size 1. She was so skinny. She says, I'm a size 10 now. Is that okay? I said, Mom, that's fine. She said, well, I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 5 days. I said, okay, come on down. My mom came to California, moved in with my wife and me, and I want to tell you, it was not that easy because I was just getting to know her. There were days when my mom wanted that instant allegiance as a son to a mother, telling me what to do. I said, Mom, hold on, wait a minute. My wife and I, this is our home. You can't just take over our house. So we had those tough conversations, and I said, remember, you're my biological mother. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. I said, Mom, you need to move out. Just for peace. So she moved not too far away from us, went back to school, finished nursing, came in second in her class, and she said to me, I would have come in first if I studied. My mom was brilliant. Our time in Weaverville ended. That's where I was pastoring. But before that time ended, I remember giving an evangelistic series. And back then, series were 6 weeks long, and my mother came to every one of the meetings. At the end of the meetings, I made an altar call, and to my deepest joy, my mother stood to give her life to be baptized in Jesus. This was what I called the highest point of my life. How does that happen? Who else but God can take an abandoned child, carry him through the difficulties of a city like New York City, spare his life, protect him, then in a roundabout way lead him to Florida by giving him the perfect wife, the one whose family lived in Florida, where he knew my aunt was. Coincidental? No, God's divine plan. Then to bring my mother back into my life, have an evangelistic series, and have the privilege of giving my life, giving my wife, giving my mom to the Lord in baptism. This picture, my mom is standing there. This is a picture of my mom and a pastor standing next to me. I was not